it in the chat too, because I don't think you have that. But
all right, good morning, everybody, and thanks for being here. We got some great topics ahead of us today. Are there any opening comments from anybody or important announcement that somebody wants to make right now?
I would. I just want to take the time before we go too far into the meeting to introduce Marianne Wolf to you all. This is Marianne's first week on the job as the GWSA coordinator. She is above and beyond exceeding my expectations on everything to date, and really hitting the ground running. So we haven't talked clearly yet about a role for all of the subcommittee meetings, and we'll be tag teaming as needed. But Marianne will certainly be playing an integral role with respect to the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee, being the key staff person there and helping to guide that work and facilitate the strategies and policies and lead it into the writing component for the climate action plan. And so we're psyched to have her on board. She's based here in A&R with me in the central office, and she will be a frequent emailer to you all, inundating you with questions and helping us get even more organized as we continue to sort of build towards the climate action plan at the end of the year. So please welcome her on board, and it's great to have her here today for these presentations.
Yay.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Marianne, you want to introduce yourself and say a few words about where you're coming from?
You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Well, hi everyone. Thanks, Jane, for the introduction. As Jane said, this is my first week full-time with A&R and the Climate Council, but in my previous role as a planner with Vermont Emergency Management, I was serving as a staff support to the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee, so have some familiarity with the process, but I'm really diving in to get to know the work of this subcommittee and others with the Climate Council. So I worked for the past 4 years at Emergency Management as a planner, working mostly on state level response and recovery planning initiatives, focusing a lot on the impacts of disasters and emergencies on our communities. So have some connection to the work that the Climate Council is focusing on. And then prior to that, I was a planner with the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission, working on regional planning initiatives at the community level. So really looking forward to supporting and working with you all, and I'm excited to be here and be involved in this process.
Thanks, Marianne. That's great. Anything else? That was a good beginning. Thank you. Why don't we move on to just approving the minutes of this June 10th meeting. Pretty straightforward. Any objections, corrections, comments on the minutes? I'm hearing none, therefore we presume they are approved by consensus. Next, as usual, we have liaison updates, and we can proceed in any order. Jared, why don't you start with science and data?
Thanks, Rich. So we just met yesterday and went through the work plans of our different task groups. Like this subcommittee, we have divided ourselves into task groups. The one that has probably the most kind of time-sensitive, piece coming up that may be of interest to this subcommittee is we will be hosting next Wednesday, June 30th, at our regularly scheduled meeting time between 1:30 and 4, an extended public comment session with regard to the parts of our technical consultants' work that is focused on the review of the greenhouse gas inventory. And so folks who have interest and questions related to that, that I think will be a good opportunity to hear both from Cadmus and EFG what their kind of planned focus and timeline is for how they do that review and begin making those recommendations. But then also to hear from others who have an interest in, in sharing resources, informing some of the nuance, raising some of the key questions that we'll need to address as we look not only at the review of the existing inventory, but to some of the questions around supplemental information that we may want at hand as we begin making recommendations, including considerations of, a fuller life cycle analysis of our energy sector emissions, as is noted in statute, and other topics that have come up from, choice of global warming potentials to, what the appropriate emissions factors are from different sources, including how different RECs may be treated. Lots of topics that I think are on the table. So if folks are interested in that level of detail and related to our GHG inventory, then mark your calendar for next Wednesday, and we will be, I have to connect back with Jane and TJ and others, but we'll be sending out information about that, I think, shortly. At 1:30 to 4 next Wednesday, the 30th.
Jared, it was a little unclear, and will there be a presentation from the consultants or from someone else about the baseline inventory, or is it just free for all, open up for comment on everything?
Yeah, so we're not planning to do another presentation on the inventory itself because Colin has done that multiple times, and that's available for folks to review from previous kind of recordings. We are planning to set some initial context, both from Jane and Secretary Moore, and then also to have the consultants say, here are the deliverables, the tasks and deliverables that we're focused on, and here is our planned approach over the coming weeks. And then basically to open it up for folks to suggest information or resources or ask questions that are related to those deliverables and tasks. Is the current draft, but we have not finalized the agenda. So if there are suggestions on the ways to most helpfully and productively do that, please do let us know. But that's kind of the working draft proposal. Jane, please add if there's anything you think I mischaracterized.
No, that was excellent. We will go through sort of the specific tasks that the consultants are looking at and the different weights we want to give to those tasks based on our current thinking of where we want to go perhaps with the greenhouse gas inventory. And so I think that it's just a nice chance, because there is a lot of public interest in this, to sort of set the stage for the work that we're doing and allow for a conversation, recognizing the sidebars that we're operating within around the statutory guidance, both for the Global Warming Solutions Act and the statutory guidance that governs how the agency, our responsibility with respect to the greenhouse gas inventory itself. And then just so everybody knows, there's been extensive public comment in both, in meetings already on this, as well as in writing, and that has been made available to the consultants. They have that all, they're thinking about that. And we had our kickoff meeting yesterday with the consultants, with the task group leads, the task group individuals, Colin Smythe, Jared, and Richard Hopkins, along with CADMIS and EFG staff and myself yesterday, to talk about their workflow for the next few weeks, recognizing that this deliverable is due mid-July back to us. So it's going to be a quick turnaround.
And also, thanks to Jane's incredible organization and quick movement, there's also initial kickoff meetings scheduled with some other sub-task groups of the Science and Data Subcommittee, given that some of our committee members are noted as kind of resources or points of contact to assist consultants or for review of initial work products. And correct me if I get any of these wrong, Jane, but I believe there's an initial meeting with the task group that's focused on the carbon budget tomorrow. And I think Jane knows who that group is better than I do. And then those of us who are focused on the question of the social cost of carbon will be meeting our kickoff meeting next Tuesday with the consultants. There may be others I'm missing.
Gina,
Go ahead, Richard. Well, I was just going to say that those are the initial tasks associated with the first up for deliverables, and then we're also meeting as a group, which I think all of you know this, but SCI, who's leading the LEAP modeling with the Public Service Department, we're also looking to put them under contract with the Agency of Natural Resources to ensure that we have capacity there for them to coordinate and work with Cadmus and EFG going forward. So we're also meeting with DEC staff, Heidi, Peter, and Public Service Department staff next week to move forward with a sole source contract, likely with the SCI, for additional capacity there. And what I just wanted to follow up and just say, which Jared's probably heard me say multiple times now, but in recognition that there's a lot of folks who have different roles with respect to different tasks associated with the technical analysis of the contract, I'm just asking that all of that run through me for now until I can't manage it all, because just from lessons learned with our other contractual services, while those services are certainly in service to all of you all as Climate Council and subcommittees, just recognizing the fiduciary responsibility of the agency, we need to ensure that ultimately the agency is making the calls on where different tasks and consultants are moving, and that hasn't worked quite smoothly with the outreach and engagement contract, with the role of subcommittees influencing that. So for now, that all the technical analysis contractual services, I'll facilitate these separate task group meetings, but ultimately be managing that contract. So if folks have comments or questions, just direct them to me for now. And I generally know who the right people are to bring in for expertise related to which task.
Thanks, Jane. You mean we can't just ask for all the work that we can imagine that we want done and just go directly to the consultant? What a surprise. Gina, do you have your hand up?
Yes, I was very interested in the last thing that Jared said about the consultant looking at things like upstream impacts. But I also note that I do not know a thing about these methods, and I just want a magic box where some answer will come out of at the end of the day. So I think getting involved in some of these discussions about the technical stuff isn't going to be a good use of my time. I mean, I can sit and I can listen, but at some point I want to be able to ask questions, but not when it's too late and you've figured out you can't answer those questions. When can kind of lay people intervene in the development of the various tools that the consultant will be asked to do? Or am I not making any sense? I feel like the data subcommittee.
What you said makes perfect sense.
Okay, so the data group, I don't want to go to this meeting in June 30th, on July 30th, because they're probably going to be speaking some language that I don't understand. Maybe not, maybe not. They're going to be getting hopefully into the nitty gritty of how it works. At some point, I want to be able to say, well, can we ask this question and that question? And then maybe they'll say no, or maybe they'll say yes, but I don't want to wait till the end and have it be too late. And the tool, the black box has been created, if you will.
Got it.
So the meeting next week is specifically focused on the greenhouse gas inventory.
Okay.
And so, and so that, I just put it in the chat, but I do think there's probably merit for you, Gina and Joey, especially related to the transportation component of the technical analysis. Once we get all these initial tasks underway, knowing that they're on an incredibly tight timelines for deliverables, and make sure that we have the right team specifically assembled to be able to answer the questions that I know you have about sort of systems thinking with transportation and beyond. And so I think that'll be a nice way to introduce you folks to the consultants and the work that they're going to do to support your work, and therefore hopefully figure out a way for you to ask the same stupid questions that I ask, because I'm not an expert in this either. So
yeah, we've been talking about this meeting for a month now, and I'm really looking forward to it. I just don't want to wait too long to have it happen.
And I'd also just offer that I would be happy to send to this full subcommittee the list of the tasks and task groups that we've identified as a science and data committee, many of which, you know, we have built in kind of time to do some initial review of the drafts that come back from consultants. And so if there are specific tasks on the kind of technical side of things that folks in this subcommittee are interested in, so that we can be aware of that. If, for instance, you'd be interested in seeing a draft rather than just the final product, be happy to try to help facilitate some of those connections. Seeing Jane nodding, if that sounds okay to you, and unless there's anything you'd add or adjust to that.
Joey, comment from you or question?
Well, just related to this meeting, which I agree, Gina very well articulated my thoughts and our hope. I am wondering if they may share with us, I know that they have contracted with other states, like how, just in, right? Didn't Cadmus do some work in New York? Or I'm just curious how they're approaching the work. A little bit of an overview, I think, would be helpful. And if it's been applied in partnership in other states, that would be helpful, I think.
Specifically to this task, Jody, or beyond, I guess. Because if that's what you're interested in, I would come to the meeting, because that is specifically what they're going to talk about, how they're going to approach the review of the inventory, the review of other state inventories, and considerations of that. So we're going to flush that out essentially.
Okay. I can't come to the meeting, unfortunately, but if it's recorded, I will look forward
it'll be
to
recorded.
being in. Thanks. Everything's recorded.
Christine? You're
Yes.
muted.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, there you go.
On the same vein as where Gina was going, I'm wondering if thought has been given, and if this has already been stated and I missed it, I apologize, but I wonder if thought has been given to having one sort of early stage sort of scoping session with some subset of the technical consultant group by sector. So example, Dave Farnsworth and I potentially with you, Jane, meeting with Richard Fazy and David Hill or whoever the right subgroup of that team is, to just talk through conceptually where their areas of focus will be for the thermal/buildings related work early on. So it's another way of asking, I think, what Gina was asking about.
Yeah, I think that's totally appropriate. And it's just a question of like getting to that, only recognizing that their role in that work is actually coming a little bit later, recognizing that right now it's still with FCI. And so, but yes, it's imperative that we set it up now so that if there's a lack of capacity or questions or challenges, that we have that moving now and not in August when they sort of get the work. So yes, I think we will do that as soon as we get through these initial deliverables.
Okay, and in saying that, I'm not in any way questioning. I couldn't think of a stronger team to be tackling the buildings and thermal component of this work. So I'm very excited about that, but I just wanted to make sure there's alignment early on. So thank you.
And obviously, it's going to be important that from this conversation, we can see it, that the data collection and modeling folks have some clue, have an idea about what kind of recommendations and mitigation measures are going to be coming out of this committee, so that they can make sure that the data that they're assembling can answer the questions that are going to get raised. And that includes the impact assessment and on the equity and justice components of it, as well as the costs and potential savings in emissions and what have you. So, but I have pretty good faith that that's understood. I'm not really worried about it, but I like the ideas being discussed here for an early get together to make sure that those things will be in alignment instead of ending up. I have been in situations where at the end, the modelers just said, well, hell, we didn't know you were thinking about that. We didn't model that. Chris?
Jared, do you want to say anything about the discussion we had in your committee yesterday about the climate impacts forecast modeling.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. There were two other pieces I wanted to provide a short update on. One was that Professor Jay Schaefer and Professor Leslie Ann Dupini-Giroux gave an update on some of the work that they're doing related to climate projections, kind of forward-looking, not just what has happened in terms of climate shifts in Vermont, and looking at things around severity and frequency of extreme weather events, projections, et cetera. So they provided an update on that, which I think is really relevant in terms of the timing of I think it's the next Science and Data Subcommittee meeting on July 7th. We'll have a presentation, as I believe this subcommittee will as well, on the Vermont Climate Assessment Report, which is nearing publication. And then there was also a subcommittee discussion, as maybe in this agenda as well, with regard to application of the just transitions principles, and how we may apply those in the work that we do as a subcommittee. But so I think some of us could speak more to that, or also in the interest of time and knowing that we've only gone through one liaison update, I'm happy to leave it there for now.
Yeah. In the interest of time, we are that is our next topic areas to discuss.
Yeah, in the interest of time, we should move on to the other subcommittee reports. Chad.
Good morning, everybody. Sorry for being a few minutes late there. Yeah, rural resilience did not meet last week. A number of us were out on vacation, but we did meet the prior week, and we've been, the task groups have been established, and we're all working through completing those various tasks. There's 4 or 5 different tasks within rural resilience. So, we'll reconvene tomorrow and continue that work. But yeah, just a lot of work sort of starting to block and tackle, as I'm sure everybody else is doing on other subcommittees. So I think that's about it. Jane, did I miss anything there?
Nope, just that rural resilience is off 1 more week.
Oh, right. Yep.
There you go. You got a few extra hours back in your life.
I got things to do, so on my tasks, so time will be utilized. Thanks.
Thanks, Chad. Just transitions. Kelly or Chris, do you have?
Yeah, I think we're probably going to cover most of it in our next section, but I don't know, Chris or Jane, is there anything that's not related to the document and the workshop from last week?
No, I think we will cover the next one. One thing I've gotten a lot of feedback. We had some feedback yesterday in the Science and Data Subcommittee on a couple of things. One is the use of the rubric and exactly what role that's going to play. And so we can talk about that in the next section. Another thing that Jared brought up, and it was really good insight, which is that in the public presentations that have been made about the principles, we've not really talked about the inequities and injustices related to the history and then continuing the status quo. And it's a good observation because I think thinking back on the presentations, I think we did probably look more at because it's called Just Transitions, more about the transition, but we really do need to spend more time, especially in the public discussion about it, about what's going to happen if we just continue with the status quo. So that was a good observation by Jared, but I think we can talk more about the use of the rubric in the next agenda item.
Okay, thank you. And is there any report from agriculture?
Well, I'll just say that they had a great meeting last week. They had Vermont Conservation Design and TNC's Resilience Network present, which seems really foundational in helping them set some vision for their subcommittee, because both rural resilience and ag and ecosystems were sort of trying to push them to think about a performance measure. So, again, ag and ecosystems has a net zero goal by 2050, but kind of a meaningless goal, since if we meet our emissions targets, we'll be net zero around 2030. So we're thinking about what a more meaningful sequestration goal might be, or target. Same thing with what does it look like for a resilient landscape. And so those presentations were really helpful. Tomorrow, for your interest, everybody, there are they'll have presentations on the climate assessment and policy chapters for particular chapters of interest to that subcommittee. And then they're going to dive into their agricultural emission reduction strategies. So that'll be the first presentation there. And that is the second half of their meeting with Ryan Patch, who's leading that, presenting to the full subcommittee on those strategies and recommendations from that task group, similar to what you all are doing today. So I imagine at some point you'll want to invite him in, Peter, or think about how that then gets brought into this work in this subcommittee. So that'll be really great tomorrow.
All right, thanks. And that's what time tomorrow?
10 to noon.
Okay. All right, we're now, any other updates? We're moving into the substance of the Just Transitions report, workshop, principles, rubric, and I think there's a presentation teed up here. And I think, Catherine, are you the discussion leader?
I'm happy to be. I don't know if there is a presentation or this is just simply a follow-up on the workshop that we had earlier. So I'll.
Okay. So conversation about the workshop.
Right. I guess maybe the first thing to do is,
Open for
I don't know.
discussion.
Yeah, I don't know if everybody was able to attend. But if you have some follow-up questions, or do we need just a brief summary of what the workshop was about? I just want to make sure everybody is sort of starting at the same place before we get into the discussion. Anybody have
It
any?
would be great if Kelly or Chris, if you wanted to take the lead on that, and then I'm happy to sort of follow up on where we're planning to go with the steering committee and the council around this body of work in the coming days, this afternoon and Monday.
Kelly, you want to start?
I'm currently trying to get a baby to fall asleep, so it might be better if you take the first round.
Okay. So just briefly during the workshop, and Jane, feel free to jump in. The principles were presented, as well as a scoring rubric. This work came out of the Just Transition Subcommittee after a lot of discussion and development of the draft principles. And we really are looking for comments about not only the content, but like how useful you feel they will be to your work and to the work of the council. I've got myself, and I think also kind of during the workshop, and I think there's a fair characterization, and again, Jane, please jump in, and you too, Catherine. I think there were fewer questions about the draft principles and more about their application, especially within the context of the rubric. Is that fair? Jane, you can nod or wave or and I've had some questions about how the rubric is to be used. And if you've not looked at it, there's a rubric that has a scale of like 1 to 3, and it basically asks questions. To what extent does the proposed policy change or the proposed idea accomplish this just principle? And it uses examples. And I think, and we need to have a discussion within the Just Transitions Committee about this, but there were questions about whether or not, is this going to be, is this more of a tool for us to use to kind of raise awareness and as individuals and as subcommittees to kind of look at the different ideas and think through about, you know, how might they score within that rubric, or is it actually a tool for the council to use to actually, you know, kind of officially judge the criterion? It was my understanding, and this may be wrong, I want to put that up front. I thought it was more the use of the tool, kind of like the way the state has developed the justice and equity questions framework that have been used at the state level. That was more my understanding. When the questions were being asked around that, I was looking at the different subcommittee member body language to the extent you can do that in Zoom, and just kind of nods or you know, facial expressions or other things. But that's something we're going to need to, I think, go back to the subcommittee with. And like I say, that was my thinking, but I could be off. I'm certainly not speaking for the subcommittee as a whole. And Jane, and Catherine and Kelly, anything else you want to add?
Well, I'll just suggest that I'll remind everybody that at the last council meeting, we proposed the idea of sort of a three-pronged approach to our equity and inclusion work, one of which is holding space at the beginning of every council meeting to revisit how this work is impacting our work developing climate policy and strategies going forward. And we did that by inviting Dr. Panikar into the last council meeting. We'll have another speaker to reflect on this at the beginning of the council meeting on Monday. The second component was around how we engage with the public, recognizing that traditionally the state has had a more reactive approach of putting something out, getting the public to react, and us doing a mediocre job of accommodating public comment into those principles and strategies and beyond. And so recognizing that we're attempting to do a more co-creation process for this climate action plan and then setting us up for long-term engagement with the public around the implementation of the plan. And then thirdly, we talked about how we operationalize and think about the organization that is the Climate Council and the subcommittees and how we do better going forward as a system and as feeling like our own body of state government really in representing and including diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we went out for a proposal from an outside organization to reflect and think about how we could do better. We're going to talk about that with the steering committee this afternoon. And based on my understanding of that, I'm going to recommend that the one component of that proposal that we focus on as a council and subcommittee is how we operationalize the guiding principles and the scoring rubric, and think about how we apply them consistently and consistently across the subcommittees going forward. And that will require us to think a lot about like the timing of how we incorporate that work, and then the application specifically of something such as the scoring rubric and how that informs our recommendations, recognizing that that's one component of also the other things we're thinking about in developing strategies, that also being multiple benefits around, like if your emission strategy also raises up sequestration and other things, their technical performance, how they actually are going to work to get us to the emissions reduction. So thinking about how that we now have this one body of work, which is only one component of how we're developing our strategies and recommendations. So how we include them both consistently and fairly across the subcommittee work, recognizing that we ultimately also have to be thinking about other components when we're thinking about strategies development and recommendation development. So we'll be talking about that with the steering committee and then with you all as council members on Monday, and thinking about how we use it. And I will just agree with Chris that I think in general, the guiding principles themselves have consistent, I wouldn't say universal, but consistent support from folks that I've heard, and the level of comments that I'm hearing from people as they get sent into the Just Transition Subcommittee really feels like it's focused around the scoring rubric and how and when that gets plugged into your strategy development. And the co-chairs are meeting this evening in lieu of a meeting tonight to think about the comments as well as thinking about next steps as a subcommittee. And we'll be looking at folks' comments and discussing how we use them and incorporate that work.
So would it be a good use of our time now then to, generate some discussion, some comments that could feed into that co-chair conversation tonight? Since this would be the first time that the cross-sector mitigation has had a chance to share your own reactions.
I think that would be great, Catherine. And that is what Science and Data did a bit yesterday. And Chris was nice enough to immediately consolidate those into some key themes and sent them to the co-chairs yesterday afternoon. And we could take the lead on doing that again, or I can hear those themes and bring them forward tonight when we meet with the co-chairs. But yeah, I think, initial reaction is really, I think that's great. And thinking about how you all who are also tasked with a statutory requirement of emissions reductions, how you also think about balancing all of that with respect to the equity role.
Catherine, I'm happy to chime in on that because I agree this is an opportunity for committee members to comment. I thought, by the way, the workshop was really excellent. It was very informative and sufficiently, I should say, eye-opening and provocative to be useful. It's really terrific. And I think that the principles document is terrific. And I've gone through it several times, and I'm frankly really impressed by it, and I think it will help us. I have one recommendation, and I think I'm echoing something that Jane really just said a couple of times, and that is that in my judgment, the justice component of our work includes also embracing the fact that climate change generally, globally, is imposing harms on vulnerable communities and those least able to deal with climate change. And that it's struck me as there's a missing piece to the text in the sense that it doesn't state that, it doesn't seem to state that as clearly as it should, that the reason we're doing this is that we have a moral imperative to stop something that is disproportionately harmful to vulnerable communities. And that's not separate from justice. That's part of our justice mission. So I found myself looking for a way to just say that. I think it's understood. Frankly, I don't think I'm pointing out something that subcommittee would, what do you say, didn't think about. I think they just said, well, we know we have the mission to reduce emissions. So, we take that for granted. Now we're going to ask how, and how in Vermont. But the cross-sector mitigation committee is worried about what Jane used the word performance a minute ago. We need to be assessing proposed policies according to how many tons are they going to save and how quickly. And so I wrote a sentence which might be helpful, and it might be just, something that someone would not like and they'd want to say something else instead. But on the subcommittee self-assessment questions on page 8 of the document, the questions are great. And the one that's missing is the one I'll read to you, which I would recommend adding. Does this recommendation make a meaningful contribution to global climate justice by reducing Vermont's climate change impacts and setting an example for other communities, states, and nations? Recognizing that Vermont's contribution to the world comes in 2 flavors. I mean, there's the obligation we have to reduce our own emissions, And then there's the fact that one of the great things about Vermont is the power of a good example, that we can do things that inspire other people to do things. And together, the cumulative impact can be much greater than what Vermont does alone. So I wrote that sentence as a suggestion that we should be looking both to reduce our emissions and to do so in ways that will inspire others to act. And I would just add that to the principles, to the list of questions in section 5. And I agree with others that the scoring rubric, I think Chris said it extremely well. I look at the scoring rubric as a thought-provoking document to get us all to think about how these recommendations might help, hurt, or not affect at all different people and different parts of our community. And I didn't think it was going to be really useful as a way to rank order our policy proposals, because it doesn't even ask how many tons is it saving and how much does it cost to do it. It would be hard to use it as a standalone scoring mechanism of some kind. It's a good list of questions, and I would use it as to trigger thinking as opposed to coming up with some kind of score for policy measures.
Two things. Richard, could you put your exact language into the chat so everybody can see it and refer back to it? That would be great. And I'm curious as to others' reactions, particularly to your final statement there, which is how it would be used. So that's one point of view, that it's a way of triggering questions that you need to be asking as you're looking at different recommendations versus trying to use it as a quantitative tool to rank order. How are other people feeling?
I was really talking about there's two different lists of questions. Section 5 of the principles document has questions, and then the so-called rubric has the 1, 2, 3 score. And I found the questions in the principles document, they were not trying to be quantitative anyway, so I found them to be useful.
Others?
I think it's important for us to try to put some relative weight to the questions that we ask in the rubric. I'm also always wary of subjective qualitative answers that get numbers put to them. And I think I agree with Richard that in concept, the starting of the conversations is critically important, and making sure that we're thinking through these things and it gives us that framework. But I would encourage, and maybe ask the question of Kelly and Chris about whether that's an acceptable use of that rubric, or should we be should we be incorporating that sort of fundamental concept into sort of our is that a measure that we should be adding to our sort of list of measures that we're tracking?
I can chime in now that I'm not putting baby to sleep. My sense of the rubric and the questions in general. So first we started with these questions, and I think there was some concern that it wouldn't be very easy to go through every single question and think about it, and it might be overwhelming. And I think that's where the idea of the rubric came from, as a way of organizing it a little bit more to make it something that you could wrap your head around. And further, my sense is a lot like what Chris was saying, that the way I was thinking about it is it's a way to identify blind spots, that we all have blind spots, and that if you're going through these questions and you're actually asked to put a number to paper, not that that's like the official objective answer to a subjective question, but that it helps you identify where you might be forgetting things, or not really fully thinking through the impacts. And so that was my sense, is that it wasn't meant to give an official like number to each policy decision, but rather to help people use this tool more fully and more easily. But I would like to know what the rest of the subcommittee, Just Transition Subcommittee thinks. So I think sounds like there'll be more discussion in the co-chairs tonight, and then possibly in the committee next week.
Yeah, Christine, you want to add in?
Yes, I am very supportive of the work that's been done and very appreciative of it. I am concerned about setting bars that are going to be very hard to reach, and hope that we find ways to continue to message that this work will take time. It will be hard to get right. We will keep at it till we do get it right. But I personally am not assuming that this first climate action plan is going to nail this 100%, that this is work that will be ongoing for a very long time. And I just hope that if others feel that way, we also start to incorporate that concept in a positive, inspirational way into our work and our thinking and our messaging. Because I worry that people will be disappointed at the end in December if we haven't fixed this all.
Call on Joey next.
I mean, I just wanted to sort of generally echo the appreciation for the really good, important work and the general sentiment that I heard Richard sharing, and I'm looking forward to seeing the words on the page related to your, proposal for an addition to number 5. But in terms of the rubric, I mean, I think the blind spot avoidance is great characterization. And what I was thinking is exactly what you encapsulated at the end, Christine, is that this is going to be iterative. And I mean, I feel like this is a frame through which we're going to be adopting and adapting this work, as we do it in service of the statute, which is in service of the climate science. And so I just appreciate the work, and I mean, look forward to applying it broadly and then iterating over time as we further the process.
Chris?
Yeah, one thing I'll just add, Joey, I totally get and what you're saying, and you too, Christine. One of the things I've been raising in the subcommittee is, having done some work around just transitions, is I've frankly never seen one. It's going to be hard and challenging and lifelong work. The only thing I want us all to remember, and I'm saying this because I remind myself of it all the time, is that it, kind of coming from a position of white privilege, things that where I may feel like, it's easier for me to perhaps say change is going to be incremental. Change is inherently incremental. We're not going to be able to make sweeping changes up front because of this condition of the status quo and past history. It is important. And again, this is what I say to myself, so I'm saying it to other people. Other people are going to want change faster because they're suffering now and they're suffering more, and that change is going to be disproportionate. So I totally get what everybody's saying, and I'm not saying I think y'all understand where I'm coming from on this, but we just have to recognize, and this is the importance, right, of engaging directly with these frontline communities and groups and individuals about their experience, their perception, where they're coming from, because frankly, we may need them to push us and our legislature and our governor and our local planning commissions and local select boards and everybody else. Many of them that have push us harder, because what may be incrementally comfortable for us may be, frankly, for some people, more a matter of, their own continued existence. So Just wanted to put that out there because we've had that conversation a lot within the subcommittee too.
Thanks very much, Chris. And your comment also kind of triggers for me maybe a slightly different use of these principles and rubric that I'm not hearing anybody talk about directly, but it's, you talked about using it to help raise awareness, to ask yourself questions as you're thinking about recommendations. It also, I think I've heard others talk about it in terms of ways of thinking about mitigation, right? So if you have a policy, you see that it can have some perverse impacts, or it's not correcting past impacts, is there, do these questions help you think about what are the ways that the policy might be amended or improved to avoid those impacts? I see Richard shaking his head because he's the one that I think has brought this up before. So it does have that potential use as well. So generally, certainly looking for more comments, but I think generally what I'm hearing is that applying the rubric in a quantitative way isn't necessarily the most popular. That's not the way most of you have been thinking about this. And yet everybody seems incredibly supportive of and endorsing the principles themselves and the questions and the overall intent. So Richard, you wanted to add something else. Unmute. Just unmute first.
There we go. Thanks for your summary. No, I wanted to underscore your point that you just made. In my experience, the goals that we're talking about here for a just transition are advanced in two ways. And one is to keep these principles in front of mind as we decide what are our highest priorities. And second, my experience is that there are usually a dozen ways to design and implement a program. And the details really matter in terms of how fair they are and who they help and who pays and who benefits. And so I'm convinced that we can design policies that could be really backwards looking, or we could design policies that would work and actually be really progressive. And so I just think that these principles are right to direct us to do that to the maximum degree we can. And since I believe that to a significant degree we can do better, then I think it's great to be reminded that we should.
So Jane, is there anything else you think would be helpful for the co-chairs in terms of it sounds like they're going to do a next iteration, or maybe provide some more guidance on how to use this after their conversation tonight? Is that the outcome?
Not 100%, but yeah, I think they're going to think a bit more about the comments that they're receiving and when and if they revise the draft based on the feedback. I know there's a lot of words, comments range from substantive to wordsmithing. So there will need to be another iteration of both the guiding principles and the scoring rubric, and when and where that is rolled out, I'm not 100% yet, but yeah, stay tuned. And I think this is, Claire McLevin, who works for the Public Service Department, is, I can drop her email here, but if you haven't seen our note saying that you should be sending comments to her, she's assimilating all of them.
Is there also another question about timing? I mean, it seems like based on the conversation we're having here, the timing is now, as you're developing recommendations, as you're thinking about them, as opposed to later. But I don't know if that's been another question. Joey, did you want to weigh in? Not necessarily on that, but weigh in.
Well, I was going to ask about the timing component
Okay.
too. And then I had just another thought. I mean, obviously, this has been a conversation that's been happening, but if folks have not been following the process, I just wonder if there's an opportunity to make sure some of our potential implementation partners are have an opportunity to weigh in on it. I think about weatherization contractors or transit agencies, or I don't know, just I feel like maybe we're not at that level yet, but I feel like I will looking forward to the practice of applying them, but I'm also thinking about how they are actually, like, our recommendations are applied in the field, and I just don't want those things to be disconnected. If like early, just letting people know about this. Anyway, it's not a fully formed thought, but
No, it's a really good comment, Joey. And I'll just say that we've been thinking about this, Marion and I, this week. As Marion steps on board, one of the things she's been running with is thinking about the template for your slide deck for your presentations for the end of July. And we've been talking about, her and I, how we also include in that template some reference, some incorporation of the guiding principles in how we sort of go out to the public, both in a stakeholder engagement component as well as a broader component, sort of laying the groundwork for these core principles that are one component of the work that we're thinking about as we develop the strategies and recommendations. So you all will certainly have a chance to comment on what those presentations look like, and Marion's working on putting a draft together that we'll bring to you all in the next, hopefully at your next subcommittee meeting. So that will definitely be thinking about that. And that's one way I think we can reach sort of the targeted implementer audience around getting feedback about what this really means in practice. So.
Joey, your comment on time, your comment about, I'm taking notes, Jane, by the way, so I could, hopefully that'll, and I'll share it with you and Claire and everybody else. But your comments about getting this out to partners for their comments, was that also your comment about timing, or were you wanting to say something else about timing?
well, just, yeah, I mean, the timing is like, so when are these? I mean, maybe these are also just, this is an iterative process. I don't know, but more just like, what is the timing in general? And yes, it would be aligned with, is there an opportunity to bust out beyond our borders into those sorts of partners who will actually be the implementing partners on the ground?
Okay.
Any last questions or comments before we move to, I think next is public comment?
Yep, Catherine, could I just a couple
Yeah.
things. One, Jane, one thing to flag for the co-chairs is I think there's a number of sort of references in here, and this is the same way with the equity assessment tool that the state developed, is there's sort of reference to data and other things that to support the evaluation of impacts on underserved communities. And oftentimes people get stuck on that because they don't know what data exists or what's available or how to do that. And so I think we're going to end up with a lot of times when people don't feel comfortable answering a question in full on the rubric, and having a sort of sense of what happens at that point. When is there any resource for help from the Just Transition Subcommittee or what have you that could be really useful, I think, for folks as they're going through it. I don't want to overwhelm them because I know they'll get lots of questions, but at the same time, if we're leaving questions blank because we're not sure how to get to the answer, then yeah, it'll be a challenge. I think the other point, and I feel sometimes like I beat a dead horse, but one of the questions in the rubric is about policy design and whether or not voices were heard in the development of the policy. And here we are sort of retroactively applying that question to policies we've already started to frame out. And that is a real challenge to me.
And Joey's asking, that if we should circle back to Richard's amendment to the language that he's now put into the chat folks need to scroll back up to see it, but which is where I am. So I guess what the question is that we don't necessarily have to reach consensus on this. I think it's something that definitely needs to be taken forward as a suggestion back to the Just Transition Committee. But anybody else have any concerns about that moving forward, or want to just endorse that language particularly? I see a couple thumbs ups. Yep.
I mean,
You're muted, Peter.
sorry.
Oh,
I wasn't, and then I was. Great. Well, it's good to have it backwards. My question for you all is whether or not you want us to express in the minutes that we sort of agreed that we would endorse that comment. If we do, then I think I need anybody who objects to that to say so now.
yeah. So maybe in the reverse. Anybody object?
Can someone read which
yes,
it is that we're talking about? Because he's got several here.
Well, I'm assuming the one that was entered at 11:49 in the chat is Richard's language, which is adding to section 5 of the principles document. Does this recommendation make a meaningful contribution to global climate justice by reducing Vermont's climate change impacts and setting an example for other communities, states, and nations?
Okay.
All right, I think you've got the go-ahead, Peter. It sounds like this is something that the whole group would be comfortable with.
Great, thank you.
And I've cut and pasted it into my notes as well, so I think we've got it. So you want to move to the public comment, Richard? We all right to do that, Peter? Oh, I see one more hand, Annette, before we move on.
Well, that's a public comment, and we're happy to hear from Annette and any others. Anything further on? Just we're ready to turn to the public comments. That's great. Gina,
I had one thing. I'm
okay.
Sorry, my video is not working that great. I want to make sure that we capture, I think it was Peter said that we as we evaluate the concepts in the rubric, we are able to include the data around cost effectiveness and greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So we're looking we have to look at just transitions through these other lenses, if you will, if and when we apply the rubric. Because it's not clear to me the rubric is going away.
So I guess that
we need to have some sense of costs and GHG benefit.
So Gina, that wasn't my comment, and I'd like to clarify.
Okay.
My point was around if we have questions about how to use the rubric and don't know sort of what data can support, and so have questions, is there sort of support available to this subcommittee to work on that piece?
Yeah.
Fundamentally, I guess I would say that I don't think we should be viewing policies through first we're already looking at them separately through the GHG and the cost effectiveness sort of scheme. This is a separate scheme through which we're also looking through, and then they combine together from an order of operations perspective. To me, we shouldn't look at greenhouse gas first, look at cost effectiveness, and then look at equity. We should be looking at them all of them at the same time and then seeing how that shakes out.
As long as we're doing that, it's unclear to me how that's going to happen. But I think that's an ideal scenario. I'm at a loss to figure out at this point how that happens. Okay.
We're keep working on it.
I'm done.
Appreciate it. Understand.
I'm done.
All right. So let's go ahead and turn to Annette Smith for our public input.
This is Annette Smith with Vermonters for a Clean Environment. I was going to comment on Richard Cowart's suggestion, but since you guys have adopted it, I guess my comment is moot. So if you want to hear it, tell me.
Yes, please.
I'd love to hear it.
I think it's problematic. I mean, I don't know if you're aware that there are a lot of people who are tired, who have said they are just tired of Vermont trying to promote policies because they're a leader. I hear it over and over again. And so, and I'm not saying this because I agree or disagree with it. I'm just speaking with an awareness of the Vermont populace. And if you're going to be in a position of trying to build support for whatever you come up with, I can see that turning off people. And the way it's worded, I'm not too sure what it means, other than that, you know, this is going to show that Vermont's a leader. But in terms of making meaningful contributions to global climate justice by reducing Vermont's climate change impacts, I mean, if we're setting up policies that address justice, I think that's probably more acceptable to be a leader on. But in terms of reducing climate change impacts, we have a lot of unique situations here. We have forests, we have mountains with some of the purest water in the world now, which isn't saying a lot. But so by saying that we're going to be a leader, we may be doing things that are not going to be adopted or even could be adopted by other states, nations, or communities. So I just wanted to flag that as I see it as being a bit challenging, although I appreciate where it's coming from. I think that especially approaching addressing climate change through a justice lens is something incredibly important. But what might come out of this policy work in terms of reducing impacts and emissions would be perhaps not something that would serve as an example for other states and nations. I have one other comment, and that's a process comment that is relevant to something that you all said, but it's probably relevant to all of the subcommittees and the full council. And that is that the consultants are looking at all the public comment. But I note that in the minutes of these meetings that the public comment like this is never captured, and you can go watch the video. So are the consultants watching the video, or are the public comments made at these meetings not being considered by the consultants? And those are my comments for this morning. Thank you.
I could respond to Annette's final comment if you'd like. We've shared key videos that were related to the topics that the technical consultants are working on with them. So we did share videos that were pertinent to the conversation that were concerning topics like the greenhouse gas inventory, presentations at Science and Data. Those meetings were shared with the consultants so that they saw the presentations as well as the public comment associated with them. We also, how we deal with public comment in the minutes was a actual discussion point around at the steering committee, and there was a choice not to try to reflect it in the minutes, recognizing that the public doesn't have a chance to do those and ensure that they were accurately represented in writing of what they said. So it was a conscious choice to reflect who spoke and point people to the video, knowing that there was a video recording as well. And when I also spoke about sharing public comments with the consultants, I shared specific public comments that we have been receiving in writing via the public portal and or specific memos or emails that have come into Climate Council members or subcommittees relative to the tasks that they're working on right now. So we did our best in trying to get them to see what they should see, especially related to public comment.
Thanks, Jane. Any other public comments? Any other attendees want to add in here? All right, it seems like we are at break. So we have till, we're already past our break time. I don't know, Richard, how you want to handle that?
I would like us to take just a little past. Let me ask the presenters in the second half, are you okay with the amount of time that's allocated to you, or would you want me to cut the break short? You're good?
And I guess it's only 2 minutes short, so.
Yeah, we'll
Okay.
deal with whatever.
Yeah, all right. So
We'll be fine.
we're already 2 minutes short. We're gonna come back at 12:25 after the hour. Please be back ready to rock and roll because we have two very substantive presentations.
Richard, are there, does the building sector have a presentation that they could share with the group beforehand, or is that going to be in real time?
So
Happy to share it with folks if they like. We were going to present it and then hand it off to
Okay.
them so you could post it, whatever suits.
That's great. That'll be fine for today. Just so folks know in the future, we really should post those with the agenda 2 days before the meeting to be in compliant with open meeting law.
All right, see you back at 12:25.
thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
I need to reach you some other way.
Rich, is it okay if I just have a slide? I'm not sure if I used this last time, a slide that has some questions to tee up for discussion at the beginning of this next session, so people have it in mind as they're listening.
I think
Can I
that's
just-
great.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Great. Share that. Disappeared. This will work. Do you have our energy task leads ready to go?
Yes.
Yep, right.
So, Catherine, do you
Before-
want me? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Catherine,
Well,
why don't
yeah,
you lead us off?
before I launch you, I just wanted to share these questions, and then I'll hand it back to you to present, but to share these questions for people to be thinking about as you go through. The same questions we had last time when we heard from transportation and non-energy. But to remind everybody that, including the public, that this is not a session to endorse these recommendations. It's an opportunity for us to help you, the task leads in your group, to help refine the recommendations that you're presenting, think about new ones that you might not have thought about, and to really think about other information that might help, solidify some of the rest of the subcommittee's approval or endorsement ultimately in July. All right, so let me hand it back to you.
Great, thanks. Let me just pull this up. Make sure I'm sharing the right one here. So this is a slide on electric sector. Okay, just get some feedback because we'll sort of lose control of everything else once I'm sharing.
Oh, yeah. I'm seeing a slide called context.
Great, perfect, thank you.
Yep,
All right,
there you go.
so just as background, this is something Liz and I have been working on. We've reached out to a couple folks to talk about some of these issues. Oh, there people are. So just by way of context, we've discussed this before. When you hear from the building sector, when we've heard from transportation, electrification is going to be one of the key drivers for decarbonizing transportation and thermal sectors. So it's absolutely critical that we get the electric sector right as well. So one thing to keep in mind is the timing of load is going to change. When you look at on a monthly basis and an hourly basis, when we expect to have EV loads and heat pump loads show up, primarily in the winter. Partly it's, my understanding is EVs is about 40% loss of efficiency during particularly cold weather, so even more charging in the wintertime. Flexible load management is also going to be really important, and Liz is going to touch on some of that a little bit later. Obviously, ensuring affordability, partly for equity reasons, obviously, but also to continue to encourage decarbonization. Fuel switching for the electric side is going to be important to actually make sure the economics make sense. And as Rich Cowart had pointed out a couple of weeks ago, you have to look at overall energy costs, but there's also the transition period as people are deciding what fuel choices, what to make in the first place. So there is the affordability component there as well. And then also equitable access to programs. We want to ensure that everybody can actually access these programs. Partly that's a communications issue. We need to make sure that people actually have broadband in their homes so that they can do adequate direct load control devices for EV charging, for heat pumps, for storage, for everything else that we're going to have 5 to 10 years from now. Another important consideration too is Vermont is part of the ISO New England grid. What we're doing in Vermont is also being replicated pretty much across all of New England, especially with respect to offshore wind. There's a lot of solar being built. I think the most recent estimate is 8 gigawatts of solar by 2032, I believe. And then also roughly the same for offshore wind as well. So it's going to be a significant change in the fuel mix, and it's going to significantly increase the cost of transmission for all the interconnection. Not saying that's that is a barrier. Well, not saying that's a reason not to do it, just it needs to be reflected in the thinking about this. Also, the wholesale electricity markets are going to change, and we need to be thinking about how we value generation as well, renewable generation, storage, demand reduction. The typical ways of valuing these are going to be falling by the wayside. We need to be rethinking that as we go along. So in terms of a concrete recommendation for policy, excuse me, first is a 100% renewable power supply requirement. Right now, the existing RES brings us to 75% by 2032. So one benefit of an RPS or Vermont's RES is that it's a percentage of load requirement. So that captures the increase of load from electrification, from more EVs, from more heat pumps. It's also a regulatory mechanism that most of the country already uses. It's well understood by pretty much any generation provider, any resource provider understands what RPS is, how it works, how it functions, all of that. The consistency is helpful. In terms of implementation, this is something utilities are taking some proactive voluntary measures, putting forth goals for decarbonization or for zero carbon power supply, and also for renewable power supply. But to make this a mandate, it requires legislative action, requires a change to the existing renewable energy standard. Also just noting, some states such as Massachusetts and Connecticut have focused on carbon-free rather than renewable, but expectation is that in Vermont, as in Maine, the focus will actually remain on renewable as opposed to carbon-free. I just wanted to note that. With respect to a structure, what this would look like, this is one area where we're having some trouble with it, largely in part because some of the issues in terms of how you actually design 100% RES are actually concurrently being reviewed in Science and Data Committee. We've got the technical consultant, Jared mentioned looking at the GHG inventory. And there's some issues as to what actually constitutes a renewable power source. There's also a lot of important policy issues and a lot of trade-offs that we need to consider. You know, in-state requirements, there's a lot of economic benefit from economic development that results from in-state requirements. There's also potential economic benefits from larger scale resources being delivered onto the New England grid that Vermont then gets some portion of. Thinking about diversity of supply, we want to ensure that we have sufficient power at night in the wintertime, in addition to, you know, the beautiful spring day. Also thinking about new versus existing. You know, we have a lot of existing renewable resources right now within Vermont and generally in the region. Definitely need to build more. And one of the significant considerations is what's the appropriate balance between the amount of new to incentivize and the amount of existing to maintain. Another piece too is a measurement, how you actually think about this. At least in theory, an RPS structure can be met through a handful of resources that produce during certain hours of the year, and you're not actually providing the renewable electrons on the 8760 on all hours of the year. Every RPS that I know of is set up that way. There's not an 8760 requirement. Should we be looking at seasonal requirements? And I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next policy. And then another consideration too, for folks who've been working on electricity issues in Vermont for a while, in 2005, there was what was called Sustainably Priced Energy Enterprise Development Speed Program. So a lot of the facilities that are actually built in Vermont are a result of this 2005 program. Kingdom Community Wind, Sheffield Wind, some methane landfill projects as well. These were all results of a prior program. Once the 2015 Renewable Energy Standard went into place, those are no longer really well suited to Vermont's new renewable energy program, or the new RES. So we should give some consideration to, were we a little bit too hasty in sort of pushing off any expectations that speed would have somehow fit in with Vermont's renewable policy. So overall, given all the different potential trade-offs that we're thinking about, recognizing that this needs to go to the legislature and that it's going to be very difficult for everybody to come to some agreement on here's exactly how to define and design a 100% renewable energy standard. What we're actually recommending is that the Climate Council instead focus on 100% res and then simply give guidance on, sorry, not simply, this is actually not that simple, but give guidance on what are the assumptions? Do we have a set of common assumptions for evaluating the trade-offs, new versus existing, in-state versus regional, distributed versus utility scale? Those are all significant issues. I doubt we're going to get everybody on the same page, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. At the end of the day, the legislature has to make decisions on this. Having a common framework for identifying and evaluating trade-offs is probably the most important thing that, at least in our view, that the Climate Council can accomplish. I'm actually going to pause there before I get into the next pieces and see if there's any question. Unless, Catherine, would you prefer there's just questions at the end?
Up to you. So if you want to, if you're going to move on to significantly different topic, let's see what people have to ask. Yeah, Dave.
Hey, Ed, really quickly, can you just explain what your point about speed? I wasn't quite clear on the suitability of using speed or not using speed.
Yeah, thanks. So the way that the current res is designed is it essentially incentivizes new distributed generation, new as in July 1st, 2015, or it incentivizes the maintenance of existing. So Kingdom Community Wind, Sheffield Wind, a lot of these projects that were built, some of the methane digesters, the RECs from that, the renewable energy credits, are actually sold to Massachusetts and Connecticut because in those states, they're considered new renewable resources. So not recommending that speed simply overturn all new mandates, simply recognize that Vermont had a significant policy that incentivized the development of quite a few resources that now do not fit in the current RES paradigm. So should we be looking at the fact that some of these are utility-owned projects? Does it make sense to incentivize these to actually fit into renewable policy in Vermont as opposed to incentivizing the sale of RECs out of state?
Ed, I don't know if it's helpful, just for those who don't follow it as closely. The issue there in part is the PUC's framework of least cost energy planning. Given the way the law is now, I think it's fair to say the utilities feel that they have to do what they're doing because it's, you know, saving customer dollars using RECs in a place where they are valued more and create more customer dollars because those flow right back, you know, to reduce rates. So that, you know, the concern that gets raised relatively frequently regarding selling in-state renewable energy credits out of state is driven essentially by the legal framework that we have and the public utility oversight that is created by it. So to solve one problem, you have to kind of solve the other, is what Ed's saying. Or you could leave it the way that it is and understand that that's a you know, a feature in Vermont that we keep if instead the policy choice were to just drive, continue to drive more renewables, new renewables, and have this sort of middle section of projects that are not covered by RES as is now.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. That was really helpful. And I will say it's the least cost framing is how the department has, Department of Public Service, how we frame that in reports to the legislature, and also honestly how the Department of Public Service framed the 2015 RES in front of the legislature during the creation. There was some discussion about what do you do with these speed resources, and it was decided, let's actually push for more distributed generation in state, recognizing that some of these existing resources, the RECs, would be sold out of state. And we're not at all making a recommendation that you should create a new tier or somehow incorporate speed, but it is a significant issue. A lot of times when I'm talking to folks from other states, they say Green Mountain Power owns a wind project and it sells its RECs out of state. Like that must be illegal. No, that's the way that we structured the 2015 RES. Like it's just sort of a little bit more consistency with regional RPS standards, I guess. Was that helpful, Dave? Great.
All right, you can probably keep going at this point, Ed.
Okay. So, sorry, I think it's hard to see my hand because
Oh, it is. It's right against your yellow wall.
Yeah, let me take that down. I just had a quick clarifying question, Ed and Liz. On the last slide, where it talks about a recommendation of 100% RES, are you suggesting a time frame for that? You mentioned that the current one is 75% renewable by 2032. Are you suggesting a target date for when we would be 100% renewable, or do you think that should be added to the list of the important policy issues to be considered, and perhaps a area of consideration for the council and or the legislature, you know, whether that's 2025, 2030, what have you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would add that to the list of other considerations. Yeah, it could be 2030, 2035. And it also dovetails as well with, do you want a decarbonization or a zero carbon goal in the interim until you get to a renewable? That fits in well with that discussion, recognizing that our utilities, when they procure long-term resources, which is Vermont policy to procure long-term resources, you know, there's a fair amount of Seabrook nuclear in Vermont's energy supply mix, and simply turning the switch to 100% renewable has cost implications that just need to be considered.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. All right, I don't think anybody else has any yellow walls, so I'll just keep moving on. Potential supporting mechanisms. Two that we're going to talk about here. Second one actually is pretty broad, and Liz is going to cover that. But I'm going to talk about renewable power when needed. Don't have a good framework or good catchy name for that yet. So, but the issue that we're trying to address here is that how do you develop policies to ensure that you actually get the resources when you need them? So solar has been transformative in Vermont. We used to be winter peaking, then we became summer peaking for a few years. With the amount of solar in Vermont now, we're solidly winter peaking. Vermont has done a fantastic job driving down peak during pretty much during all months. At this point, we're very solidly winter peaking, and we peak after dark every single month. So again, very transformative. So once we add EVs and heat pumps, as we add more and more, we're going to become even stronger winter peaking. Most of the resources that we're going to need are actually going to be in the wintertime. Also recognizing that as you increase the amount of variable resources, as load increases, you need to start sending price signals of here's when the load is, here's when the resources can participate. How do you sort of marry those up? How do you send the policies to say we need resources during this time when load is expected? Or conversely, how do you try to shift load to the times when the variable resources are producing? To date, the existing policy mentioned before, the existing RES incentivizes distributed generation under 5 megawatts located within Vermont. It's had significant benefits. It's not incentivizing the generation that actually will perform well during the winter months when we expect load to increase, when we're starting to see load to increase. So the incentive should reflect the value of the resources for the grid needs. What do Vermonters need during wintertime, nighttime hours? Also recognize that these can be delivered lots of different ways. Storage is one of them. So the next couple slides are simply pulled from ISO New England. Vermont System Planning Committee does they hired Itron to do load forecasting. In addition, ISO New England does its own load forecasting. They did a more granular forecast. They looked at monthly hours as well, and they looked on a region-wide basis. So the transportation electrification forecast actually used very low EV numbers. They used EIA's forecast of EVs, which is pretty conservative. But what you can see here is starting in 2026, and then even more so, you can really see that the peak for EV load is really in January. And so mostly in the wintertime. There's a little bit of valley there that I don't quite understand. But what we're seeing is that this is just a graphical representation of what I was saying before, that we're going to have a lot more load in the wintertime. Same thing for heat pumps. This is essentially showing this doesn't capture as well as it could the increased load from heat pumps in the summertime, but basically showing that we're going to get a lot more load from the heat pumps as we electrify as well.
Hey, Ed, do you mind if I just add one filler on your point regarding incentivizing winter resources, essentially? I think it's also important to note, and I think your two slides show it visually, we're going to need more DG, period. So as we consider whether to modify policies to provide extra encouragement, as it were, for the resources that meet that shape, we also will be, through the percentage allocations in general, getting more of everything on the system. So it's not a message of, oh, we got plenty, we just need winter stuff. It's we need more, and we need to think better or more granularly about the shape.
Yeah, completely agree. Thanks for adding that. Yep. So this is completely hypothetical approach that definitely needs a lot of tires being kicked here. Basically identify where is the gap in terms of resources. We're based on the slides just above, it's showing it's really wintertime months. Solar definitely produces in the winter, obviously much less than May and June, but definitely produces. And so mostly focused on, I think, where we're going to need the resources, and this is hypothetical, or this needs to be looked at a little bit more, but basically sometime between November 15th, March 1st, that's when we're going to see most of the increase in load, heat pumps and EVs. And then the after dark, so 4 p.m. to 10 p.m., 6-hour period. This is when the region as a whole is going to need a lot more resources. So you could have a separate tier within renewable energy standard that says we want resources that produce during these time periods. You could provide adders. There's different ways to provide adders. There's lots of different mechanisms to provide the incentives, and also recognizing storage is an obvious one. You could add storage to solar to help produce in the wintertime. But you also have a fair number of renewables that actually produce well during the winter already. We've got hydro. Wind produces pretty well in the wintertime, and what we've seen from the Block Island offshore wind project is produces extremely well. Capacity factor is very high during the winter. Also demand reduction as well, simply shifting load away from that time period could be extremely valuable. The last point here is trying to tie in a little bit with the building sector. Weatherization isn't really targeted towards a specific time period, but it reduces the electric load from heat pumps across all hours of the year. So it's going to be beneficial from 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. So thinking about connection with the building sector, with the overall wintertime loads is going to be really important. I'm going to stop there for a second. Again, this is hypothetical, kicking around some ideas, and very curious as to what people think about this.
Think back to the questions, are there any other policy ideas that you can imagine this group should be thinking about in order to achieve the goal? Any information you'd like to see to help kind of fill any gaps in your mind about how effective this might be? Any stumbling blocks that you see that they should be thinking about? Yes, Chris.
Sorry, I'm not a subcommittee member. I'm a council member. So I don't know. I don't want to jump in. But something I've mentioned before, and I've messaged a little bit with Liz about this, is just getting the power into homes and into the appliances and into the chargers and all that stuff. We probably need to be thinking about some kind of utility like an Efficiency Vermont or something to actually increase electricity access to homes. My assumption is, I'm not an electrical engineer, but my assumption is most homes in Vermont are going to need, at least 200 amp service to supply all the various appliances and chargers. And I can tell you from looking at homes recently that a lot of homes in Vermont are 100 amp. So there's just this whole piece of actually getting it into houses. And I would say, frankly, it's also probably once you get into the houses, then actually getting it to the appliances. And the other things. So there's internal electrification stuff too.
So Chris, really good point. And we talked about, like the order of presentation here. It's actually, although it's the last slide coming up, and I can jump into it right now.
Oh,
it might be, no, that's fine. Because you're raising, it's like a chicken egg thing. I mean, in some ways it should be the first point, right? Because in order to do everything we're talking about, we need Vermonters to be able to make their home infrastructure upgrades to support this. And this says electrification for all, but it's really fuel switching for all, right? Because it doesn't matter so much whether they're going to choose electrification or some other fuel switching method. Yeah. And so, yeah, I will, evangelize for this wherever possible. And I know others will as well. And I think it's the key to the equity conversation too. We need to put the type of focus that we brought to efficiency, 20 years ago to this issue. Like, how do we actually enable everybody in multifamily homes, mobile homes, apartments, small, older country homes, urban settings, new homes across the board? How do we enable them to take advantage of all of these new equipment, new programs? And it's self-serving too, right? Because it helps all of us to the extent we're all able to do it. We can get back to the flexible load management. So yeah, we can scroll back to flexible load and I'll just run through it super quick so we can get other comments. But another enabling piece here is ensuring that we not only continue the programs that already exist, but recommend and set up policies that enable flexible load management. And what we're talking about here is peak loads, whether at the local level, sub-transmission distribution, Vermont level, or at the bulk system level, regionally, drive costs for Vermonters. And they also create costs in terms of upgrades that need to then be dealt with. So it's an immediate market cost when we have a peak, and it's also an infrastructure issue as circuits get loaded and or there's a mismatch between the amount of generation and the amount of load. There's also a resource adequacy issue because it's not just about the poles and wires, it's also how ISO New England plans for the offshore wind projects and solar projects and other projects that they're going to have for generation down the road. They actually make those plans based upon what they see as the need. And so if we're not managing our peaks well, we end up essentially in a position where we could overbuild and, in that sense, cost all of us more money than we need to. So peak management is really important, and having policies that encourage it are critical. And there are things like are listed down below, the EV charging shifts, working with our commercial and busing fleets to maximize the load control values those will have when they're not running routes, working with commercial customers to maximize how their operations work from an electrical efficiency point of view in their operations. And then making sure Vermonters have access to heat pumps and other devices, water heaters, et cetera, that will allow load control. And, the charging profile on the slide below that Ed can scroll to tells the story. As Ed noted, EVs obviously are going to add load to the system. Hopefully they'll add a lot of load as transportation decarbonizes. And they require even more in the wintertime when the efficiency of the batteries is lower. So here's an example where in January, it's approximately 40% more electricity than August. So we have to think about that in our flexible load programs so that we're essentially targeting the peaks the right way and trying to shave them to save costs in the market, as well as make sure that our resources and infrastructure are adequate. Let's see, next slide. That includes other opportunities for load management. Heat pumps on the thermal side are included in that. Storage not only provides resilience for individual homeowners, but also gives the rest of us the advantages that we talked about a second ago if they're load controlled either by the homeowner or an energy service company working with the homeowner, or through the direct utility load control programs that exist now and should continue to exist and have an expanded role going forward as more and more of these devices come online. And then you can not only do that kind of direct control, literally making decisions about when to turn things on and off, you can also encourage all of that through rate design. And, we talk a lot about rate design sort of in the abstract, but thinking about how it can actually affect behavior and be welcomed by Vermonters, I think is a real challenge. Typically, we have not seen the uptake on rate design, new rates that we might have hoped. And I think one of the things we need to look at now and forward is how the usage is really changing, how the rate should be designed. So thinking about those hours Ed was talking about right now, typically an on-peak time for a utility is during the day. Well, you know, other states are looking at, and so should we, whether that's the right design when we have significant solar resources, and perhaps we need to change our rate structure so that people are encouraged to help soak up that generation when it is happening, so that the load and the generation matches and the whole system is more efficient. And then of course, keeping in mind overall reductions, because you know, energy efficiency becomes even more important as we look at these measures. And of course, weatherization that we've talked about before, particularly if you're pairing in a home where the electric load's going to go up because you're doing a fuel switch to a heat pump. Although of course it's important from a comfort and cost point of view, even without that. Okay, next slide. And then finally, the cross-cutting policies that I think the electric sector recommendations need to support, even though I believe they'll be hit in other areas such as the building sector and the rural resiliency. First, resiliency zones. Many of you have heard about this before, but essentially encouraging community level planning for the type of resiliency and recovery from weather events that will help Vermonters going forward, making sure that there's local generation paired with local storage so that a community can maybe ride out for a few days at a central hub that has good communications in order to maintain core community services while homeowners and others in the area, businesses are recovering. And then, as we talked about a second ago, thanks to Chris's question, just making sure that all of this supports Vermonters making the actual decisions in their homes and being able to afford the switches that will be needed. I think it's not just a matter of money, it's also technical education and just support. I mean, switching your panel size, putting in electric vehicle, thinking about how to control a heat pump, considering putting storage and solar in your home. These are pretty big choices, and they're ones that we have to support Vermonters on, both from a financial point of view and also just how to do it and how to make it as easy as possible if we're going to hit what we need.
If I can just add a couple of things, I'm just going to scroll up. This daily charging profile, it's important to look at the date here, 2020. So this was actually pre-COVID, sort of move to a lot more telecommuting. It's going to be interesting to see how that actually affects. That can help us with the shifting of the timing and also hosting capacity using shifting EV charging to the times when solar production is highest. So there's already some interesting stuff just in the last year and a half that's actually already changed. The other piece I want to mention really quickly, time of use rates is actually a pretty broad area. It can be whole home time of use rates, which, as Liz said, has not had a lot of uptake. You can also have end use specific time of use rates. You can have EV rates, you can have heat pump rates that encourage usage during certain times, discourage during other times. And these can all be blended together. You can have direct load control programs combined with time of use rates. That's actually probably the most effective. So just making clear that there's a lot in here. This is flexible load management. There's a ton of different policies and lots of variations you can have. Oh, and sorry, one other last piece too, related to the storage paired at homes. This actually is interesting because it can be, a power wall. It can also be the F-150 Lightning as well. Like Sunrun's doing some interesting stuff with Ford on, a bi-directional charging station in home. So there's lots of different opportunities that we're starting to see.
Okay, let's go back to questions. I saw a bunch of hands went up and went back down. Chris, yours is still up. No. Jared, Chad, Rich, you all had your hands up earlier, but
Yeah, Liz covered the comment that I was going to make. Thank you.
Joey.
Mine was covered also.
Okay, I have just a couple of questions. One, just like potentially clarifying. when you spoke about the definition of renewables, are you suggesting we keep the current definition or it's changed? Or we recommend a change?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was saying that the Science and Data Subcommittee, technical consultant, and looking at the GHG inventory, one of the issues that's come up has been to what extent should large hydro be considered renewable? And my understanding is that's something the technical consultant is actually looking at as well in terms of with respect to the GHG inventory. So we're not recommending changes. We're just recognizing that Climate Council itself is coming up with recommendations on these. And so we're not trying to jump ahead of the Climate Council discussion on this.
Just a friendly amendment clarification. My understanding is that the technical consultants who are working on the GHG inventory review are not looking at the question of whether or not to treat large hydro or define it or consider it as renewable. Should it be truly considered a zero emitting resource? And so it's more a question of what is the emissions profile of each electricity source, rather than just saying it's got to wreck at zero. That there may be some variation in there, especially if we're looking for more of a life cycle perspective of each energy source.
Got it. Thank you, Jared.
And I appreciate the presentation. I just I have a few questions, and I don't want to. I also am curious about the 100% RES, and I mean how HQ fits into that is a question I have, and it seems like it potentially fits into that other part of the conversation, which could also, anyway. And then also thinking about the role of, clearly you have identified the need for more local distributed generation. What that looks like and through what programs it's deployed is an open question. In terms of the, you noted really clearly, and I think it's true, shaping policy to align with resources that meet Vermonters' needs. Storage is one way, demand reduction is another. Our load shape has shifted. I know this is still initial, but what other resources, what might that look like in terms of just a draft sketch of other parts of that portfolio?
Yeah, I think offshore wind is the most obvious, and then hydro as well.
Not in Vermont, though.
Not necessarily, and I think that is actually one significant issue, is how much of this is an in-state requirement, how much of it is recognizing Vermont's part of the regional grid aspect as well, and that offshore wind and mass can be easily delivered, or we can support offshore wind and mass to support the overall grid in New England.
Part of it also, at least when I think about it, Joey, part of it for me is, when is the region actually going to build what they've got in the queue, or will they, I guess, / when, and how do we make policy now that's got that 10 and 20-year look, which is really what we're talking about. So thinking about, I think Ed came up with the framework and put it in the slide of, like, maybe if you go to 100%, you actually either create additional tiers or additional time points, like carbon free by X, 100% renewable by Y, or as you proportionately increase the tiers that already exist, do you also make sure that tier 2, which is presently the local under 5 megawatt tier, increases even further upon dates in the future or load conditions in the future, even beyond its current ratio? Or do you just change the ratio now? And if so, what resources can you encourage within that to make sure you're getting, essentially an efficient total package? So it's a good, we as a group and council need to help land on how much the Climate Council report should direct those details versus, as Ed said, identify the overall goal and the need, point out the choices that need to be made within it and their relative advantages and disadvantages. And we don't have the answer. That's why we're presenting it.
Yeah, and the other point I want to add too is that, Peter mentioned this before of the timing between developing policies, talking with all affected stakeholders, in some ways having the Climate Council, to the extent that we can collectively come to consensus on evaluating the trade-offs. And so not everybody has to agree on what an RES, 100% RES design would look like. If we can agree on most of the evaluations when we go to the legislature, it can be a conversation. And more importantly, when we go to stakeholders and say, how do you want to see your electric portfolio? Do you much more prefer the in-state versus out-of-state? What's the preferences? Basically, how would you design it, recognizing that there's no absolute perfect solution that solves everything?
Definitely not. We're in a pickle. This is why we're having this conversation. So lots to consider here. And part of that, offshore wind and hydro, for me, I get that. And I'm looking forward to a further conversation. I would also say, thinking about when it comes to the equity component, thinking about equity outside our own borders, in Hydro-Quebec, what is that? So I have some questions there. And then also just that, I appreciate the way you were framing it. And I believe I've heard you say this before, Liz, in particular, again, the existing programs we have, they may evolve, but there is a need for more in-state distributed generation that has local jobs, resilience benefits, building a 21st century grid, the local distributed supply has a key role in that. So looking forward to learning more about and seeing what that looks like in this conversation in our work. So thank you guys.
Thanks.
I just want to note that there's some comments in the chat about bioenergy, large scale hydro versus run-of-river hydro. And what I'm hearing you say, Ed, is that those would be subject to the same sort of questions and pros and cons and advantages and disadvantages, rather than you coming forward with saying, yes, bioenergy should be included or not included in large hydro. So am I right?
That's absolutely right. Yep.
Right.
Every resource has different supply characteristics. Every resource has different impacts. And especially when you look at the entire supply chain, all the way from manufacturing, end use production. And so having a full evaluation or full understanding of the entire impacts, I think, is really important.
So we're running into the buildings time now. So I want to just make sure any other pressing comments that you want to provide to the electricity subgroup, and you can also do that through the chat. Anything you want to be sure you're sharing with the whole group.
Catherine, does the chat get captured elsewhere? I'm sorry that I don't know. If I look at the video later, I don't see the chat. I'm just wondering the extent to which I need to take notes, because these are good comments in here that we haven't hit yet.
Well, I know that whoever owns the Zoom can save the chat before they close the Zoom, so you can capture all of it.
Maybe Jane, if you wouldn't mind just sending me and Ed the chat, so that Peter and Diane and the other comments that are in here, we can capture in our thinking. Is that okay?
I have no idea how to do that.
Okay,
I can just take
screenshots. It's no problem.
Well, and
figure it out.
as I understand it, this has been, the co-host is handed to Richard, so he'll probably be doing the closeout, right? Because you have to jump.
I can just take screenshots. Don't worry.
Liz, you can just cut and paste the entire chat, just really simply, and plop it into a Word doc.
Thank you, David.
So does everybody else? I can do this. There's a file button on mine.
I just did it. Yeah, I see that.
At the very bottom of the chat, there's 3 dots. And if you click on that, it says save chat.
Oh.
And there you go.
Where does it go?
I didn't think there was more to learn. This is great.
It saves it in a little text file under a Zoom folder in your documents. So it'll be there. And you can actually set your settings so that it will do that every time you have a Zoom. And you don't have to manually do it.
Catherine, I have one sort of related point, and Jared is, this is for science and data to continue to mess around with. As I listen to more of the conversation around the sort of life cycle analysis, upstream analysis, whatever we want to call it, of the electricity sector, it reminds me that we are not as that contemplating that for any other energy source and or
I don't
energy
think that's true.
use. Sorry, I shouldn't have said energy source. I mean, from a energy, from a product consumption, agriculture, whatever it is standpoint, where are we getting the goods and services that we're buying? We're focused entirely on the energy use piece. I think largely misses the drivers of our energy use. And I want us to be careful there that we're not digging too far into the weeds in one thing when we're looking at the symptoms and not the root cause of that energy use.
I think that's a good point. I can just offer a quick response. From the kickoff meeting and my understanding of how the RFP was framed and what the tasks and deliverables of the consultants are, first, it would be that the extent to which we look at how we would do life cycle analysis of our energy use, it wouldn't just be the electricity sources, it would also be the energy used in the transportation and thermal sectors. But second, they are also going to look at what Oregon and Minnesota did in doing an economy-wide consumption-based emissions inventory, and basically the processes, timeline, resources that would be necessary if we were going to go in that full economy-wide consumption-based approach, which is not specifically mentioned in statute, whereas recognizing the emissions that occur from the energy consumption in Vermont, even out of Vermont, is mentioned in statute. So that, I think, is going to have more of their focus in the review, because it's the life cycle analysis of our energy consumption is explicitly mentioned in statute, whereas those other sectors are not. But it's not to say it's going to be left off the table, because there is time for them, and they are planning to look at those full economy-wide consumption inventories that Oregon and Minnesota did.
So just for everybody's clarity, the statute that Jared is referring to was pre-existing statute before the GWSA. And the way we addressed it, the inventory, was looking at burner tip emissions essentially on energy produced outside of the state. And that there are pros and cons to all those things, but that's not a new requirement as part of the GWSA. It's always been a part of the way we do our inventory.
All right, I want to be sure we have time for building, so I'm going to switch it over to Dave.
Thanks.
Right, Dave, and let you get going.
Thank you.
Love that.
Are you able to see something beside a baby swimming?
Yeah. Yes, now we are.
That's great. Thanks, everybody. So Christine and I are really happy to be able to do this presentation to you today. My apologies to Jane and others for not getting our slide deck in on time. There just happened to have not been a slide deck on time. That was the reason. That's usually the reason. So what we're going to do is talk about two important themes. Our discussion today is sort of based around two important themes. One is policy drivers, and the second is equity. I think policy drivers are really important here because we've seen plans that go on the shelf. They're lacking mechanisms to make things move. And we think it's really important to focus on those things. I'll tell you more about the recommendations in a minute. We've talked with lots of people. We've talked with architects and fuel suppliers, program designers, implementers to help us understand best we can and to settle on the recommendations that we're about to give you. And we've tried to weave our concern for overburdened and underserved communities into these recommendations. And this is consistent with Kelly's blind spots point, which I buy into 100%. We have to admit we got to do a better job because it's affected communities, not us, who are going to be best suited to providing insights here that really clarify and focus precisely what we should be running with here. So with those preliminaries, I'm going to hand it off to Christine. Mike's yours, Christine.
Great. So next slide, please. So just very quickly, because I'm mindful of the time, we wanted to remind people, we know there's a ton that's been going on in the building sector for 30 years or more to advance energy efficiency and renewable energy. And there's a ton of existing policies, programs, and initiatives that many people have worked really hard to get right and should be continued and expanded. And that's not what we were attempting to do at this point in the process, to capture all those and reflect them back to you, but rather to think about, given how aggressive the new emissions reduction targets are, as they should be, it's clear that what we're doing now is not enough. So we really looked and thought about what's missing for key drivers to achieve where we're trying to get and where we will get by 25, 30, and 50, recognizing that there are, even though we do have more public money right now than we might have thought we would have had a year ago, there will inevitably be a much larger demand for investment than public monies can provide. And as we all know, what we're trying to do is use the public monies to leverage and scale private investment in a way that makes this possible, cost effective and affordable and accessible to all. So that's sort of the context that we brought ourselves into in starting this work. Next slide, please. And the building/thermal sector, which we're trying to remessage to buildings, following the just transition guidance to try to make language simple and understandable to all. We do have the benefit of the 5 pathways that EAN has modeled in their emissions reductions pathways model. And we had these 5 major pathways in mind, recognizing that as the technical consultants apply the cost effectiveness analysis work that they'll be doing, that the amounts and exact pathways may be adjusted, but the one obvious takeaway from this is the scaling that's needed to happen, and the speed with which the scaling needs to happen. So that was another important aspect of our thinking when we were trying to come up with not the full list of everything anyone could possibly do, but the short list of what are the biggest, most urgent things to do next that are missing. And with that, I'll turn it back to Dave.
Thanks, Christine. So folks, as I noted earlier, we've chosen to recommend a handful of policy drivers. 4 of them are directly related to buildings. Here, listed on the left: enforced building energy codes, rental property efficiency standards, state/regional appliance standards, and weatherization to scale. The others focus on fuels, government, education, and financing. So let's take a quick run through of those. Efficiency standards for new buildings. So currently, for commercial buildings, architects and builders certify that these buildings meet applicable standards. We recommend requiring the same certification for residential buildings. Additionally, we think that it's important to incorporate that certification into property transfers. I don't know exactly how to do that. There are a number of ways of doing it, but knowing that a characterization of the building's efficiencies is part of the commercial transfer, we think will put greater emphasis on improving the efficiency of buildings. Education and certification of building professionals obviously is going to be a really important part of this. Architects, engineers, contractors, code enforcement folks, all will be critical to making this successful. Rental property efficiency standards. This is an opportunity to get after buildings that are heavily occupied by energy burdened Vermonters. This would require property owners to meet minimum efficiency standards before they can receive authorization to rent properties. This is an approach that's been adopted, for example, by Boulder, Colorado. It requires a fair bit of ramp time to educate and to support landlords before the program goes into force. In Colorado, it's about 6 years. To make this work, the approach should financially support the training for landlords over a period of time. And perhaps that support could be provided in exchange for an agreement to not change rent, say for a period of years, like 5 years. The third recommendation is to adopt state and regional minimum, what we call control-based or emissions-based standards for appliances and equipment. Now, we're all familiar with federal appliance efficiency standards, and they largely preempt state efforts, but states are not preempted for purposes of addressability and controllability of appliances or emissions they produce. So imagine Vermont working with northeastern states to adopt a standard for a controllable heat pump water heater. So the only type of heat pump water heater that can be sold is the kind that can be controlled and managed to do the things that Ed and Liz have just told us are so critical to be able to do, to be able to manage this load, move it off peaks, move it around to where it's most optimal for folks and for the utility situation. And in line with what they had to say about load management, appliances can be controlled to optimize grid operations. They can take advantage of lower cost times, cleaner times. They can also, these resources also can simply avoid indoor air pollution that we get with certain appliances that we are using today. The fourth of these recommendations is called weatherization at scale. Vermont has been doing weatherization for many years, but we've never really been able to manage to get it to the scale that certainly that we need with the Global Warming Solutions Act goals in sight. We all know that if your building is not weatherized, winter comes along, you're heating the great outdoors, wasting energy and polluting unnecessarily. Weatherization at scale is an effort that VGS and others are undertaking to determine how best to ramp up Vermont's really strong experience. We have lots of capacity in this respect. VGS, Burlington Electric, Efficiency Vermont, CAP agencies, NeighborWorks, with all this expertise. There will be challenges. Financing is one. There are some opportunities being considered by the group working on weatherization to scale. On-bill financing, Recovery Act funds, rural energy funding, VHFA, the Clean Heat Standard, which I'll mention in a minute. Another challenge is going to be scaling workforce. We have the expertise, but scaling the workforce we need to meet this demand is going to be also really important. But I think we have an example right in our own backyards. We know that scaling the solar market over the last 10 years to get the workforce that we needed to install the solar that we wanted to see, we were able to do that. And my guess is that we'll be able to do that with weatherization, as long as there's solid support, as long as there's clear commitment and the willingness for businesses to plunk down money and make these investments. The fifth recommendation, this has to do with fuels, is a clean heat standard. It's a performance standard. It's applied to providers of fossil heating fuels in this state. And it requires them to deliver a gradually increasing percentage of low emissions heating services to Vermont customers. Vermont has a history of some fuels contributing to efficiency programs. The clean heat standard is designed in part to incentivize delivered fuels and VGS to become part of this transition. A longer conversation here. There's also an opportunity for these companies to move from being what they've done historically is be large commodity providers to becoming companies that provide all sorts of different kinds of heating services. What this program, what this program would do, it would credit them for selling customers not only fuel and cleaner renewable fuel with, but also efficiency products like heat pumps or weatherization, as well as increasing the renewable content of their fuel. So that's a quick run through, and I'm going to pass this back to my partner here.
Great. So there's three more that we wanted to discuss with you as these most urgent, needed soon, and that's continuing state agency leadership, not just in energy efficiency and renewable energy improvements in state-owned buildings, but expanding that to include greenhouse gas planning, so that when agencies are doing their own analyses, programs, planning their expenditures, that they're reflecting on the greenhouse gas goals and doing specific emissions reductions, greenhouse gas reductions planning as part of their ongoing work. Next slide, because I've got my eye on the clock, Dave, but I want to make sure there's time for discussion. Dave mentioned workforce development already in talking about weatherization, and it's more than just a weatherization gap. We, especially right now, I think you can't live in Vermont and not be aware of how everyone has hiring signs. And the demographics of our state and the wage pressures across all sectors really bring workforce development challenges to many, many industry types. And because weatherization and building energy improvements are local work that can't be outsourced, the buildings and thermal sectors will be greatly affected on our ability to achieve our goals if we don't have very comprehensive, targeted, well thought out, coordinated workforce training, development, and recruitment initiative. The legislative study group that's working under the leadership of Efficiency Vermont right now with an October 1 deadline is a starting point. As I understand it, they will largely be looking at a building science-based curriculum and identifying opportunities for pushing out that curriculum. And that's just a beginning. And in order to do this successfully, next slide, please. The challenge is no one entity really owns this opportunity and problem. And so it will involve coordination across a wide range of educational, agency, nonprofit, and other sectors. And the good news is we have the chance to create many, many jobs through achieving these targets. And the bad news is we're going to really have to be very aggressive and proactive in order to come up with the workforce to do the work. There's already shortages even at the current scale of activity. And then last slide is about tariffed on-bill financing, which Dave mentioned also. And we decided to single it out as well. There are many, many new and different funding and financing offerings and expanded offerings needed. Tariffed on-bill financing is especially important because it's an example of a way to pay for improvements in buildings that does not involve public monies and does not involve people taking on personal debt, which is important, especially for those who are considered unbankable by traditional banks and financing programs, and for those who choose to not want to take on personal debt in order to reduce energy use and improve the efficiency of their buildings, even though ultimately the investment will be paid back on energy savings. So those are the top 8 that we wanted to start the conversation with as what we thought was missing and most urgently needed next. And now I will turn it over to Dave, and then I think probably Catherine for discussion.
Thank you, Christine. No, I just want to mirror what Christine had to say. We open it up to those of you who want to kick tires on what we suggested here.
All right, Liz.
Oh, thanks. Sorry, I wasn't expecting to be first. Great work. And, you know, it's so nice to hear from 2 people who are so clearly expert in this area. That, you know, the technical details are great to have. 2 comments. One is I would urge that you consider how you can frame your recommendations with Vermonters first and foremost, thinking about the buildings that they live in now and how those buildings can not only be weatherized, but also ready for fuel switching in general, whether it's other equipment needed for electrification or otherwise. And I feel like that could be amplified and brought higher up in your list, which presently starts with kind of building codes and, you know, regulatory mechanisms rather than, you know, making sure that we frame programs, including investments directly for Vermonters. Second comment is related, tariffed on-bill financing. You know, there's work going on right now. Some utilities have versions of this type of program for certain equipment or a third-party open access billing tariff like GMP does. But The piece of your recommendation that may need either some tweaking or further amplification is it's not clear in what you're recommending whether you expect that to be utility company financed or instead enabled. And those are two very different things with different potential costs. Utility company finance in general, while it might streamline things for customers, would also likely cause a higher cost. So looking at utility company enabled, where the bill is used and the charges are bundled to make it easy for the customer, but the financing is coming from elsewhere, is something that at least I know we would recommend gets included so that we don't miss that opportunity.
Really helpful comments. Thank you.
That's very helpful.
Chris and then Joey.
Yeah, I put in chat. I'll make the case pitch again. I'd love to see the council suggest that Vermont adopt, this is my professional opinion, adopt more comprehensive building codes. I appreciate the efficiency code and the need to, but you know, if you can design and retrofit a building to be efficient, but at the same time, if you've also got poor plumbing, poor wiring, or substandard, or beyond, you know, out of code, plumbing, electrical, grading, structural, you're going to have problems. Buildings are systems, and the systems interact with each other. I'm saying this as if somebody used to manage inspections and permits for Calvert County, Maryland, and I've seen what happens in the absence of building code and building code enforcement. So I'd strongly, and that this gets at not only the efficiency of homes and or buildings and retrofits when that work is done, but frankly, the long-term sustainability and the stored carbon and the other aspects of just the long-term viability of the buildings that are built. The other thing I just throw out there, and I've got a bias here because I have a master's in landscape architecture. I'll just throw out, maybe run these suggestions by the chapter, the Vermont chapter of the American Society of Landscape Architects, to advise on site design implications that the council should be taking on. I'm not a member of the chapter, but I'd be happy to make that connection if you guys would like me to do that.
Thank you. Chris, can I ask you just to expand a little bit on your first comment? So you have code issues, and then you run into a house that has wiring issues and plumbing issues. What alternative approach would you suggest? Or are you just saying this is going to cause the problem that anybody who wants to renovate an old building is going to run into, which is way more stuff that needs to be done?
No, what I'm saying is Vermont should adopt a building code and enforce it, and not just the energy efficiency code, but structural, electrical, plumbing, and gas, and grading. Because I mean, I can tell you, looking at we just changed out houses in December. We looked at houses here before, and the number of even relatively new construction that has grading that just puts water right into the house. The quality of electrical work that I see going into houses, the plumbing work that I've seen done in homes. This is through multiple building inspections and other things. You can see what happens in the absence of building code and building code enforcement. And I know that's not the Vermont way, but I'm wearing my professional opinion hat. It's certainly not the position of Wyndham Regional Commissioner or the other RPCs, but I'm wearing my, I've got experience having, done this work in another jurisdiction, and I've seen what a difference it can make, and I've seen what a difference it makes when you don't have those codes in place. Right. And the other thing I'll add to that too is, we need to be looking. One of the things I brought up in the Science and Data Subcommittee yesterday is, as we look forward at weather events that we should be anticipating, even things that we may not take into account in Vermont now, like tie down straps to make sure that the building frame is actually well attached to the foundation, and the roof is well attached to the walls, things that you would use in more hurricane prone areas. If we're going to see more straight line wind events, more tornadoes, and frankly, especially the eastern part of the state, we're not that far from the coast, we might need to be looking at other building standards that reflect changes in weather that we're likely to see. And the goal here is not to increase costs or burden on anybody. It's to ensure that people are safe in their homes, and frankly, that those homes will age well, and that you won't have to keep working on them, replacing the building materials over time because they're rotting or something. Yeah, that's it.
Great, thank you. Great comments, thank you.
Joey.
I agree. Great comments and good work. Thank you so much, Dave and Christine, very thoughtful overview. I would echo Liz's, recommendation in terms of like focusing in on the consumer. This is such wonky stuff, but especially when it comes to, for example, weatherization, which is not sexy, not visible to a lot of people, and so making it, talking about the benefits and otherwise like thinking about the end consumer, which gets to my point about sort of how we are thinking, not just in the weatherization, building, thermal, whatever we're going to call it, world, but like the process of making it easy for consumers. I mean, there's different models out there like NeighborWorks, for example, which has sort of navigator services that really make it easy for people to, sort of do this, one-stop shop, make the investment, get the incentives, have a trusted contractor and a trusted partner in the process. So it's a placeholder for, again, not just in the building thermal space, but in general, sort of like the capacity that will help people make these investments, consumers make these investments, and may not be needed for all programs, but for some, I think potentially even in weatherization, that's really important. And I would also just note, like, sort of in the workforce, clearly that's a huge component. I also wonder about, because it's such a conundrum, it's a huge opportunity, but at this moment it's a conundrum. I've been part of conversations, and there are conversations happening and around the idea of like sort of this concept of a climate core. I do wonder about if there's an opportunity to just leave space for creativity and building off of different structures and models out there that would make it, like it's a sort of a service oriented, but it would make it more affordable. It could help us bring to scale the kinds of capacity, people power we'd need to do the work. And a couple other thoughts. One, just I do appreciate, the inclusion and recognition that to do this, we're probably going to need to like make a greater investment, either raise, new dollars, or do things like the clean heat standard. I think that, we've seen a lot of progress in the electric sector. That's not by accident, it's by policy design and requirements. And we need similar tools in the transportation and thermal space. And I think a clean heat standard is, a well-constructed one, could help us really get there. I had another thought and it just escaped me. So, but those are some general thoughts. And I think this is really good foundation. So thank you.
Thank you.
Keep muting myself. Rich, you're up, and Joey, if you think of it, we'll come back.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for a coherent set of recommendations, and really well presented. And I do agree with the folks who, are saying that we have to think about all of this from the point of view of homeowners, renters, landlords, end users, and I think you all are well on the way to that. The question I have for you is a magnitude question. I mentioned this to Dave yesterday, that if we're looking at climate goals for 2030, let's say, or 2040, my guess is that building codes are important. They're not going to deliver a lot of tons because the pace of new construction in Vermont is so slow relative to the size of the existing building stock. Similarly, weatherization, we know from a lot of experience, weatherization will maybe reduce emissions from an existing building by maybe 25% if we do a good job. And 75% it still remains to be dealt with through clean heat. And so a way of presenting this ultimately that helps to rank order or I don't even want to say rank order. Rank order is the wrong word. We need to do probably everything that's on your list one way or another. But that articulates the relative ability of these different policy initiatives to get us on the path to our climate goals, and therefore helps to focus our attention on getting the job done with respect to those things that are just absolutely have to get done quickly in order to make progress. So please correct me if I've said something wrong about relative scale, or, you know, how do you see the number of exclamation points you would put beside your different policy proposals?
Oh, I'd like to hear what Christine's saying. I agree with you, Rich. You know, the fuels issue is huge. Existing buildings, very expensive to retrofit. And I've seen different figures as to what sort of savings you might get. So from let's get after carbon, your emphasis is correct. If you want to consider equity, I think things jiggle a little bit. And I think weatherization of existing buildings, weatherization of rental properties gets you a lot of traction with the sorts of communities that we're being told have not, well, we understand have not been paid attention to. So I think we need to go back and look at this, but there's just not one factor to consider. I guess that would be my quick response.
Yeah, my quick response would be clean heat standard, clean heat standard, clean heat standard, and weatherization and consumer assistance, funding assistance for those most burdened by energy bills. And that, I think that would be where I would focus.
Was that clean heat standard 3 times or 4 times, Christine? I just want...
3.
Hey, Joey, I see you have recall here.
Yes. Oh, dear Lord. Unless Chris, did you have your hand up?
Same hand?
That's a lingering hand. Okay. And apologies that you guys are, I mean, I have some ideas that are applicable to this conversation, but not singularly applicable to buildings and thermal. I think they're more applicable. I think about 2 other things, which are, I think about our affordable housing partners and the good work like VHCB and others are doing in terms of bringing our, you know, affordable housing up to pretty, you know, strong standards. I do wonder if there's an opportunity to, you know, as they do their work, fill in that gap, making sure that they are built to last. I can't remember who was raising that point. I'm sorry, but that if there's a gap between, you know, really very efficient buildings and like high performance buildings, and then we could bridge that gap to get them to net zero, affordable housing in particular, I wonder if we can explore that. And I think that there may be some potential partners in like VHCB and other affordable housing partners in that work. And then I do agree that the time of sale, this is not just applicable to buildings and thermal, is such a critical component of like just helping people not lock into strategies. And when it comes to buildings, that's time of sale, or excuse me, fossil fuel. And when it comes to buildings, that's time of sale, sometimes in like transactional like purchases. And that's where I think like a building label or some other, just like letting people know about that is really important. So I'm echoing some of what you've already talked about, and I'm raising a couple of other random ideas.
Thank you.
Ed, I'll let you go. And then I see a couple of comments from the public, a couple of clarifying questions from the public that we probably should move to next.
Okay, let's make this quick. Rich, I agree with you in terms of Looking at the priorities of GHG reduction, what does concern me though is recognizing that if you don't weatherize first, you're essentially locking in higher energy usage in a building. And even if it's a renewable energy, it's still not just cost, but also energy production, everything else, whether it's heat pumps, advanced wood heating or something else. I would put in the plug for recognize that weatherization ought to be sort of a first cut or somehow incorporating that concept in there of the longer term energy usage.
I have a quick reaction to that, which is that I halfway agree with you. And I just think we have to be intentionally very smart about this. Because if the standard is, sorry, you can't put in a pellet stove until you weatherize, then we are really going to slow down our pace of change. And so we have to have a different way of helping people get to whole building solutions that doesn't sort of stand in the way of some immediate progress.
Real quick, I agree, and education is absolutely critical to all this.
So we have a comment from the public. Daniel Edson is asking for elaboration on the policy initiative that you described early on, which was to have state agencies take into account greenhouse gas emission impacts in their programs and their budgeting. I think you mentioned, do you want to say more about that and how that would be done?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So state agencies have a lot of buying power, and they expend a lot of money in the state, and so making sure that's done in a sensible way, and by that I mean in a way that promotes the goals that we're looking to achieve here with the Global Warming Solutions Act, I think is worth considering. So I would recommend that state agencies look at that. Taking a really specific example, OEO, for instance, is responsible for low income weatherization. OEO's mandate is based on families and their ability to meet their economic goals. And so when low income weatherization is conducted, somebody's up in your attic blowing in insulation, OEO says to the weatherization organization, to the weatherizing companies, weatherize that attic only to R49. That's a DOE standard. We want that. We don't want people to have to spend a lot of money. But it would be a matter of a few more cents if the person up in your attic blowing in insulation insulated to R60. But OEO has not been directed under its statute to consider carbon. If it were to do that, then for pennies, you could get a better insulated low-income weatherization result. That's one example.
And Olivia, Renewable Energy Vermont, has a question. You can read the fuller version of it, but I think her bottom line is, has the group considered, or would you consider actually including a phase out or prohibition of installations of oil or gas boilers in the future? So more of a mandate to, you could have no more new fossil fuel installations. And Olivia, you're free to correct me or add when we get to the public comments verbally.
So I'd consider it, but I'd also consider other approaches. The clean heat standard sets up an approach that allows for a sort of an orderly transition and creates incentives for companies to make that transition. I don't have a strong feel for whether or not that glide path is a quick enough transition for what I might prefer, or what Olivia might want to see, or for what needs to be done for the Global Warming Solutions Act goals. But what it does is put companies that are in a position to frankly, to morph and to become something different than they are today, to adopt business plans that are a little different than what they have today. That's a good opportunity and less disruptive than it would be to just say, you got to stop doing stuff by 2025. That would be my quick reaction to it.
Let's go ahead and just open it up for anybody else who's attending and been listening in, who wants to say something verbally. Happy to hear it from you now. Nanette, you can have any hands?
Are you meaning this is public comment?
Yes. This is the
Okay.
public comment period, in
Thank
addition
you.
to the other earlier ones we had.
I didn't raise my hand, but this is Annette Smith. Shall I say something?
Please do.
So a few comments on the energy presentation. When attempts have been made to cite industrial wind after the current projects have been built that were where the RECs were sold out of state, one of the things that I heard a lot in communities was, well, this isn't even going to benefit us. We're going to have all the impacts and we're not going to get any of the benefits. And I'll point out that one reason the SPEED program was a problem was not just because of selling the RECs out of state, but also they were being counted towards Vermont schools at the same time that they were being used by other states. So that was a fundamental issue. The challenge in distributed energy that I'm encountering, I've been asked a number of times to make presentations on enhanced energy planning, and I'm doing one next week. And I looked at the Green Mountain Power grid maps, which are very helpful. And the entire town is in red, which means it really has no capacity for anything, I guess, larger than maybe, rooftops solar. And I don't really know what to tell the town. I mean, they do have some three-phase power, but in terms of them planning to meet the goals that have been set for them, they don't have a lot of options. So I wanted to point that out. And on time of use rates, I will note, if you've been reading the news about what's happening in California right now, one of the big pushes is to get people to charge their vehicles in the afternoon when the sun is shining, because what people are doing is they're coming home from work and they're plugging their cars in, and that's just when you don't want to be doing it. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic that, historically, I think we've all thought time of use rates, you charge your car at night when there isn't a lot of load, but in this new framework, it appears more beneficial, I would say, living with solar off grid, that, yeah, you use the power when the sun shines. And finally, I'm looking at technologies, the piece that I am interested in for my own personal use, because mid-November to mid-January, I don't get much solar power. And so I'm running a gasoline generator. I'm using propane instant hot water. I do live next to a brook and it does freeze, but it runs under the ice. Is there some sort of run of river that doesn't require building a dam? I mean, I've seen some technologies, but that is one thing that Vermont has a lot of that other states don't. And if there was some way for us to capture that, I could trickle charge my batteries. It would not need to produce a huge amount of electricity, but it would make a tremendous difference in the winter. So I found a few sites. I've shared some of them with the Commissioner of Public Service. I haven't found anything that I think that I'm going to install, but I do think that it's a very interesting potential for us. So thank you very much.
Thanks for those comments. And George?
Yep.
Want to introduce yourself?
I'm George Gross from Shoreham, where I'm a planning commissioner, and I wanted to bring up a topic that came up at a commission session this past Monday. We were discussing a draft of our enhanced energy plan, and frankly, it didn't go well. There was considerable pushback on some of the things here that the council's talking about. Simple thing is, for example, having an energy code for a building. In this rural town, frankly, there's very little that the zoning administrator is really authorized to do. If we were to try even put a energy code or building code in place, there'd be considerable pushback to that. And my estimate is it would never get ratified by the town. Never mind whether you could pay a building code inspector to visit the properties and do the certifications. That in its own right is a skill set that's not common and would require hiring somebody with expertise. So I guess one of the cautions I would add to your planning process is how to accommodate the many rural towns, and there's probably several hundred of them in this state, that frankly are not yet doing anything resembling building code compliance. It's not on their radar to do so. And there's certainly an amount of bias against doing it at all. I'm not clear on what the response or answer is, but it may require state level action because the resistance at the local level is going to be considerable. In a related note, our town happens to have a large amount of land that is agricultural, and many acres are in conservation easements. Altogether, 60% of our land is ag land. And I think one of the things that's kind of lurking here is the land use policy choices you make when you deploy solar, which at this time, based on what I'm seeing, is typically about 8 acres of land use per megawatt peak capacity. That starts adding up quickly. And places such as our town would be probably a good candidate for that, assuming the transmission upgrades. But that said, it does raise hard questions about what value systems are you trading off when you build out solar and take away from ag productive lands. And again, this kind of gets into land use policy, and many of the planning commissions at the local level don't have the skill sets to execute on these kinds of plans and certainly in terms of actually executing at the local level a build out of their own solar or doing large scale building energy retrofits and heat pump installations. That's all pretty, let's say they could write things on paper, I think, and that's what I'm seeing is it gets written down on paper, but there's not a clear path for how it gets actually implemented. And so these are all factors that I think need to be considered when you're moving forward. I'm not offering at this time a particular way to fix it, but I do think it's something you need to advise, start conjuring up some ideas and also integrate in your plan. Thank you.
Appreciate those comments. I know we're at the top of the hour and we're starting to lose folks to the steering committee. I don't see any other hands. So Rich, I'll hand it back to you just to give us a glimpse of the next meeting or what you see is on the agenda going forward.
Let me ask folks to, I'll turn to Peter actually to see whether he has specific ideas for the next meeting, but it would be